Picture this, a thriving city, bustling with traders, farmers, and rulers, all sustained by a mighty river that has flowed reliably for centuries. Then, without warning, the waters begin to recede. The riverbanks dry up. The life-giving current that fed crops, powered mills, and connected distant lands suddenly shifts its course, leaving behind a barren wasteland. This isn't just a scene from a disaster movie, it's a reality that has played out time and again throughout human history. Rivers, those seemingly permanent fixtures of our world, have been the silent architects of destiny, capable of building empires and then wiping them off the map with a single, relentless change of course. From the Indus Valley to the deserts of Mesopotamia, civilizations have risen and fallen at the whim of these watery giants. Think about it. The same rivers that nourished the earliest cities could, in a matter of years, abandon them entirely. The Harapan Civilization, one of the most advanced of its time, may have met its end this way. The Tigris and Euphrates, once the cradle of Sumerian innovation, shifted over centuries, leaving once fertile lands to wither. These weren't just geographical changes, they were historical turning points, moments when entire cultures were forced to adapt or vanish. And yet, we rarely stop to consider how much of human history has been shaped by the unpredictable dance of rivers. So why does this matter today? Because the legacy of these ancient shifts still echoes in our modern world. The borders of nations, the ruins of forgotten cities, even the stories passed down through generations, all bear the marks of rivers that refused to stay put. In this video, we'll journey through time to uncover how these natural forces rewrote the fate of kingdoms, toppling rulers and reshaping entire regions. We'll explore the science behind why rivers change course, the human stories of those who lived through these upheavals, and the surprising ways these events still influence us. By the end, you'll never look at a river the same way again, because beneath their calm surfaces lies the power to alter history itself. The Nile didn't just feed Egypt, it built an empire. Every year, like clockwork, its floods deposited rich black silt across the valley, turning barren land into the most fertile soil in the ancient world. Farmers didn't just rely on this cycle, they structured their entire calendar around it. The river was so central to life that Egyptians called their country Kemet, meaning the Black Land, after the dark earth left by the Nile's gifts. Meanwhile, over 1,000 miles to the east, the Tigris and Euphrates worked similar magic in Mesopotamia. Their unpredictable floods forced early engineers to invent irrigation systems, sparking innovations that would later spread across the globe. These weren't just waterways, they were the original economic engines, the highways of trade, and the lifeblood of entire cultures. But rivers don't negotiate. When the Indus Valley's mighty Saraswati River began to vanish around 4,000 years ago, it didn't just disrupt harvests, it unraveled a civilization. The Harappans had built their cities with meticulous precision, complete with advanced drainage systems to handle seasonal floods. Yet when the river shifted course, possibly due to tectonic shifts or climate changes, their carefully planned world collapsed. Streets that once buzzed with traders fell silent. Without water, crops failed and people scattered. Similar fates awaited cities along the Yellow River in China, where sudden course changes could drown entire regions or starve them of moisture. The difference between prosperity and ruin often came down to something as simple as where the river decided to flow next. What's striking isn't just the scale of these disasters, but how little control even the most advanced societies had over them. The Romans, masters of engineering, couldn't stop the Tiber from flooding Rome repeatedly. The Maya watched as their reservoirs dried up during prolonged droughts, their stone temples left stranded in the jungle. Rivers didn't just shape geography, they dictated the rhythm of daily life, the reach of kings, and the survival of languages, religions, and technologies. When a river changed its mind, it didn't just redraw maps, it rewrote history. And as we'll see next, some of the most dramatic upheavals came when rulers failed to heed the warnings written in the water. The Harapan civilization didn't just disappear overnight, it faded away like a river drying in the sun. At its peak, this society boasted cities with grid-patterned streets, sophisticated drainage systems, and even standardized weights and measures. Mohenjo-Daro alone may have housed 40,000 people, a staggering number for 4,000 years ago. But then, something went terribly wrong. The Gaga-Hakra River, their version of the Nile or Tigris, began shrinking. Satellite images today reveal its ancient bed, a ghostly imprint winding through what's now the Thar Desert. Geologists point to two likely culprits. Either tectonic activity literally tilted the land away from the river, or climate shifts redirected monsoon rains elsewhere. Imagine the desperation as wells ran dry and crops withered. The Harapans weren't helpless, they'd mastered water management with reservoirs and canals. But when your entire civilization is built around a single river system, no amount of engineering can compensate for its disappearance. Unlike Egypt or Mesopotamia, where people could shift along a still-flowing Nile or Euphrates, the Harapans had nowhere to go. The river was their highway, their drinking source, and their agricultural heartbeat, all vanishing at once. What's haunting isn't just the physical abandonment, but the cultural silence left behind. The Harapans had a writing system we still can't decipher. Their art, their daily routines, even their reasons for sticking around as conditions worsened, these stories are lost to us. Archaeologists find no evidence of war or invasion, just gradual depopulation. Families likely left in small groups, scattering east toward the Ganges or south to other settlements. Within a few generations, knowledge of plumbing systems and city planning faded. The domino effect was brutal. No water meant no farming, which meant no taxes to support administrators or artisans. Specialized skills like metallurgy or bead making disappeared as people returned to simpler subsistence living. This pattern repeats across history wherever rivers reign supreme. When the Oxus River shifted away from the Bactria-Margiana civilization in Central Asia, their fortified cities became desert outposts. In Cambodia, Angkor's intricate hydraulic network failed when monsoon patterns changed, contributing to the Khmer Empire's decline. Rivers don't just provide water, they create networks. Break those connections and trade routes dissolve, governments lose control, and knowledge disperses. The Harapans teach us that even the most brilliant societies are fragile when nature decides to rewrite the rules. And as we'll see next, some cultures didn't just collapse, they were literally swallowed by the waters that once sustained them. Mesopotamia's story reads like a warning etched in clay tablets, a tale of human ingenuity undone by nature's unpredictability. The Euphrates and Tigris didn't just nourish the world's first cities, they demanded constant negotiation. Early farmers dug canals to redirect water, transforming arid plains into lush fields of barley and dates. But with each harvest, invisible trouble brewed beneath the soil. As irrigation water evaporated, it left behind salt, slowly poisoning the land. By 2000 BC, cuneiform tablets lamented, "The earth turned white," a haunting description of salt-crusted fields where crops once flourished. The real crisis came when the Euphrates, burdened by centuries of silt from upstream farming, began seeking new paths. Like a restless serpent, it abandoned channels near and Yoruk, leaving temples and palaces stranded miles from the life-giving current. Archaeologists find evidence of desperate repairs, canals dug deeper, levees reinforced, but against the river's will, these were temporary fixes. The death blow wasn't just the water's absence, but what remained, salt concentrations so high that even drought-resistant barley refused to grow. The Akkadian Empire, once stretching from the Persian Gulf to Anatolia, crumbled as famine sparked rebellions. Babylon's legendary Hanging Gardens, they were as much a feat of survival as beauty, built atop artificial terraces to escape the creeping salinity. What makes Mesopotamia's collapse so unsettling are the parallels to today. Modern dams and irrigation projects, from the Colorado River to the Nile Delta, face identical challenges of silt buildup and salinization. California's Central Valley now battles toxic salt deposits in its aquifers, while Iraq's farmers watch the Euphrates, weakened by upstream dams, shrink to a trickle. The ancient Sumerians had no satellites to predict climate shifts or concrete to stabilize riverbanks, but their fundamental mistake mirrors ours, assuming nature's bounty was endless. They too exploited the land until it pushed back. The difference is scale. Where Mesopotamia's crisis unfolded over centuries, our interconnected world could see dominoes fall in decades. Yet there's hope in the ruins. Recent excavations at Tel Leilan reveal how some Akkadian cities adapted, switching from wheat to more salt-tolerant crops like sesame. Others harvested salt as a trade commodity, turning crisis into opportunity. These weren't passive victims but resilient societies that innovated until the challenges overwhelmed them. That resilience and its limits holds lessons for today's water-stressed regions, because rivers may change course, but human creativity doesn't have to run dry. The Saraswati River wasn't just a waterway, it was a sacred thread woven into the very identity of ancient India. Hindu texts like the Rig Veda sing its praises, calling it the best of rivers and mighty as the ocean. Pilgrims once bathed in its currents, poets compared its roar to thunder, and entire kingdoms flourished along its banks. Yet today, if you search for the Saraswati on a modern map, you'll find only dust and whispers. This paradox has puzzled scholars for centuries. How could a river so central to civilization simply vanish without a trace? The answer lies hidden beneath the shifting sands of the Thar Desert. Satellite photos and ground-penetrating radar reveal a startling truth: a vast, dried-up riverbed snaking across northwest India, perfectly matching descriptions from ancient texts. Geologists call it the Gaga-Hakra Paleochannel, a fossilized echo of what was once a colossal river system. Sediment samples tell the story. Around 4,000 years ago, this channel carried Himalayan meltwater through what's now Rajasthan, feeding countless settlements along its course. Then, abruptly, the water stopped. What caused such a catastrophic change? The land itself holds clues. Tectonic shifts near the Himalayas likely rerouted the Saraswati's tributaries, starving the main river of its lifeblood. Imagine the domino effect. As the Yamuna and Sutlej rivers were captured by the neighboring Indus system, the Saraswati shrank from a roaring giant to a seasonal trickle. Seasonal monsoons could no longer sustain it. Crops failed, trade routes dissolved, and cities like Kalibangan, once bustling ports, were abandoned to the dunes. The timing is chillingly precise. This hydrological crisis coincides with the decline of the mighty Indus Valley civilization, suggesting the Saraswati's death may have triggered a cultural collapse. But here's where myth and science intertwine in fascinating ways. Ancient texts describe the Saraswati as disappearing into the desert, a detail once dismissed as poetic license until archaeology proved it true. Folklore speaks of a vanishing river punished by the gods, while geological surveys show evidence of sudden earthquakes that could have diverted its flow overnight. Even the Vedas hint at ecological trauma, with hymns pleading for rain as the earth grew thirsty. These weren't just stories, they were survival memories passed down through generations. The Saraswati's ghost still haunts modern India. Farmers in Haryana report finding ancient wells buried in their fields, their stones perfectly aligned with the lost river's path. Satellite data now guides attempts to revive sections of the old channel, tapping into underground aquifers that may hold remnants of its waters. Politicians invoke its name in debates over water rights, while scientists study its demise as a cautionary tale for today's climate-stressed regions. The river may be gone, but its legacy flows on, a reminder that even the mightiest forces of nature are never truly permanent. What makes the Saraswati unique isn't just its disappearance, but how deeply its absence was felt. Unlike the Nile or Tigris, which shifted gradually, the Saraswati seems to have vanished within human memory, leaving scars in culture and landscape alike. Its story challenges us to rethink how civilizations respond to environmental catastrophe, not with sudden collapse, but with slow adaptation, migration, and the stubborn retelling of stories that keep lost worlds alive. And as we'll see next, some rivers didn't just fade away, they struck back with devastating fury, rewriting history in a single flood season. China's Yellow River doesn't just flow, it fights. For millennia, this swirling, silt-laden giant has been both the cradle of Chinese civilization and its greatest tormentor. The river earned its nickname, China's Sorrow, through a relentless cycle of creation and destruction. One moment, its fertile lower soil would transform valleys into breadbaskets. The next, its waters would burst through makeshift dikes, swallowing entire provinces without warning. The Qing dynasty learned this brutal lesson in 1855, when the river abandoned its southern course near Kaifeng and carved a new path 300 miles north overnight. The floodwaters drowned an estimated 1 million people and displaced millions more, crippling the empire's economy and fueling rebellions that would eventually topple centuries of imperial rule. What makes the Yellow River so uncontrollable? The answer lies in its very lifeblood, loess, that fine, wind-blown sediment that gives the water its golden hue. While other rivers carry gravel or sand, the Yellow River transports enough silt to fill the Grand Canyon every 2 years. As this sediment settles, it raises the riverbed, forcing engineers to build higher and higher levees. Over time, the river essentially flows above the surrounding land, held in place only by human ingenuity. It's a geological time bomb. When the pressure becomes too great, the river breaks free, seeking lower ground with catastrophic force. Historical records document over 1,500 major course changes in the last 3,000 years, some subtle shifts, others apocalyptic rearrangements of the landscape. The Qing disaster of 1855 wasn't just bad luck. It was the culmination of centuries of mismanagement. Emperors had poured resources into maintaining the southern route, believing it vital for transporting grain to Beijing. But corruption led to shoddy dike construction, while deforestation upstream worsened erosion. When the inevitable breach came, the river didn't just flood, it rewrote geography. Villages became lakes, fertile fields turned to swamps, and saltwater intrusion ruined coastal farmland. The financial strain destabilized the already weakening Qing government, giving momentum to the Taiping Rebellion and other uprisings. In a bitter twist, the very river that had sustained imperial power for generations became the instrument of its undoing. Yet there's a deeper lesson in the Yellow River's defiance. Unlike Egypt's predictable Nile or Mesopotamia's twin rivers, China's greatest waterway refused to be domesticated. This forced Chinese engineers to innovate on an unprecedented scale, inventing complex irrigation systems, perfecting flood forecasting, and even attempting early forms of sediment control. The river's volatility became a crucible for resilience, shaping a culture that learned to thrive amid chaos. Modern China still grapples with this legacy, spending billions on dams and diversion projects while acknowledging that complete control is an illusion. The Yellow River reminds us that some forces of nature don't exist to serve humanity. They demand adaptation, humility, and respect. And as we'll see next, even the most carefully engineered solutions can unravel when rivers decide to write their own rules. The Nile may seem eternal, its annual floods as reliable as the sunrise, but history tells a different story. Far to the south, beyond the pyramids and pharaohs, the river once nourished a kingdom just as mighty Meroe, capital of the Kushite Empire. This wasn't some minor outpost. At its height, Meroe boasted towering pyramids, blast furnaces producing high-quality iron, and a written script we still struggle to decipher. Yet today, its ruins sit stranded in the Sudanese desert, miles from the nearest flowing water. The secret to its demise, the Nile's long-lost tributaries, arteries that once turned this region into a green oasis, slowly withered away. Archaeologists tracing ancient riverbeds have uncovered a startling truth. The Nile wasn't always the single thread we see today. Satellite imagery reveals ghostly channels branching southward, dry veins that once carried monsoonal rains to Meroe's doorstep. These weren't minor streams, some stretched wider than the modern Nile itself. When these tributaries dried up around 300 AD, possibly due to shifting rainfall patterns or overuse, the consequences were irreversible. Iron smelters dependent on steady water flow to power bellows and cool furnaces fell silent. Farmers watched as fields that had fed generations cracked under the sun. The kingdom didn't collapse overnight, but without its lifeblood, Meroe's influence drained away like water into sand. What makes this ancient crisis so urgent today is the eerie parallel unfolding along the modern Nile. Ethiopia's Grand Renaissance Dam, climate-driven droughts, and soaring population growth are straining the river like never before. Egypt's Aswan High Dam, built to control floods, now traps nutrient-rich silt, forcing farmers to rely on artificial fertilizers. The delta, home to half of Egypt's agriculture, is sinking as sea levels rise while saltwater creeps into aquifers. These aren't hypothetical threats, they're echoes of the same pressures that doomed Meroe. The difference today, over 200 million people depend on the Nile's waters, 10 times the population of ancient Kush at its peak. Yet there's a twist in this story. While lost tributaries buried Meroe, climate change might ironically resurrect some of them. Scientists studying paleochannels believe increased rainfall over the Ethiopian highlands, a predicted effect of global warming, could reactivate dormant Nile branches. On paper, this sounds like salvation for parched regions, but reality is messier. Unpredictable flooding from erratic rains could overwhelm ancient irrigation systems designed for gradual rises. Crops bred for the old Nile cycle might fail under new conditions. Even Meroe's ruins warn us, when water returns after centuries, it doesn't necessarily bring back what was lost. The lesson here isn't just about rivers, it's about human memory. Meroe's people likely saw their crisis coming, just as we do today. Their inscriptions speak of failed harvests and desperate migrations, yet they clung to their cities until the end. Will we repeat that mistake, or will we read the Nile's history as the cautionary tale it is? Because while empires rise and fall, the river keeps its own counsel, reshaping civilizations with the quiet power of a shifting current. The Aral Sea was once the fourth largest lake in the world, a shimmering expanse of blue stretching between Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. its waters teeming with fish and its shores lined with bustling ports. Soviet engineers in the 1960s saw it not as a marvel of nature, but as a resource to be harnessed. Their plan seemed logical: divert the Amu Darya and Sadarya rivers, the sea's lifelines, to irrigate vast cotton fields in the desert. The math was simple: more water for crops meant more economic growth, but nature doesn't obey spreadsheets. Within decades, the rivers slowed to a trickle, and the Aral Sea began its death spiral. By the 1990s, it had lost more than half its surface area, splitting into smaller, saltier pools. Today, satellite images reveal a wasteland of rusted shipwrecks stranded in cracked earth, a graveyard of what once was. This wasn't just an ecological tragedy, it was a human catastrophe. Towns like Moynak, once thriving fishing hubs, became dust-choked ghost towns. With the fish gone, unemployment soared. Toxic dust storms, laden with pesticides and salt from the exposed seabed, choked the air, leading to skyrocketing rates of respiratory diseases and cancers. The irony is brutal. The same water projects meant to boost agriculture poisoned the land they were supposed to nourish. Cotton yields temporarily rose, but at what cost? The Aral Sea's demise wasn't an accident, it was a case study in how short-term thinking can unravel entire regions. What makes this modern disaster so chilling is how neatly it parallels ancient collapses. Like the Harappans watching the Saraswati vanish or Mesopotamians battling salinization, Soviet planners underestimated the delicate balance between human ambition and natural systems. Rivers don't just supply water, they sustain microclimates, stabilize soil, and support intricate food webs. Sever those connections, and the consequences ripple far beyond the immediate crisis. The Aral story also exposes a universal truth: civilizations rarely collapse from a single blow. Instead, they erode through a series of bad decisions, each seeming reasonable at the time, until the damage is irreversible. Yet even here, there's a glimmer of hope and a warning. In the north, Kazakhstan's efforts to rebuild the smaller Aral Sea with dams show partial success, with fish stocks slowly returning. But the larger southern basin remains a cautionary monument. As climate change intensifies water scarcity worldwide, the Aral screams a question we can't ignore: how many more civilizations will we sacrifice to the illusion of control? Because whether it's the Soviet Union or ancient Sumer, the pattern is the same when we treat rivers as tools rather than partners. The bill eventually comes due. And as we're about to see, that bill can arrive in ways no one expects. The Indus Valley didn't collapse in a day, but its demise might hold an unsettling mirror to our modern world. While rivers naturally shift over centuries, evidence suggests human hands sped up the process, chopping down forests for fuel and farmland, overtapping water for irrigation, and unknowingly altering the very landscapes that sustain them. Sound familiar? Archaeologists studying the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro found layers of silt suggesting catastrophic floods, possibly worsened by deforestation upstream. Without tree roots to anchor the soil, monsoon rains would have washed vast amounts of sediment into the river, choking its channels and forcing it to burst its banks. Meanwhile, salt deposits in abandoned fields hint at another man-made disaster: over-irrigation. Just like in Mesopotamia, excessive watering left behind toxic salt, poisoning the land long before the river fully abandoned it. But here's the twist: these ancient farmers weren't reckless. They were innovators, responding to population growth and climate pressures with the best tools they had. Their canals and reservoirs were engineering marvels designed to stretch every drop of water. The tragedy isn't that they failed, it's that their solutions created new problems they couldn't foresee. Take the water mining of the Kanat systems, underground tunnels that tapped groundwater. At first, they seemed like a lifeline until aquifers drained faster than rains could replenish them. This isn't just ancient history. Today, from California's Central Valley to India's Punjab, we're repeating the same cycle, pumping groundwater so aggressively that satellites detect sinking land. What separates us from the Harappans isn't ignorance, it's scale. Their actions affected a single river basin. Ours ripple across continents. Modern dams, like those on the Mekong or Nile, don't just redirect water. They trap the nutrient-rich silt that once fertilized floodplains, forcing farmers to rely on chemical substitutes. Deforestation in the Amazon disrupts rainfall patterns as far away as the Tibetan Plateau. Yet the core dilemma remains unchanged. How do you balance survival today with survival tomorrow? The Harappans likely didn't realize they were undermining their future until it was too late. We have no such excuse. Ice cores, tree rings, and satellite data scream the warnings they never heard. Perhaps the most haunting lesson lies in what didn't happen. Unlike Egypt or China, where cultures adapted to shifting rivers by moving or innovating, the Indus Valley's decline seems sudden. Some scholars argue this points to a grim truth. When every backup system fails at once, when rivers shift, soil salts, and rains vanish, even the most advanced societies can reach a tipping point. Today's climate models show similar convergence, with melting glaciers, rising seas, and erratic monsoons threatening to compound crises in ways we can't fully predict. The difference this time, we're not just victims of nature's whims, we're the architects of the change, and that means we still have a choice: to heed the whispers of dust and ruins, or to let them become our epitaph. Ancient engineers didn't lack skill, they lacked humility. Take Mesopotamia's labyrinth of canals, a marvel of Bronze Age technology designed to tame the Euphrates. These weren't just ditches, they were precision-engineered channels with sluice gates and overflow basins, some stretching over 50 miles. For centuries, they worked flawlessly, turning desert into farmland. But the system had a fatal flaw. No one accounted for the river's silent rebellion. Every diverted drop carried silt, and every irrigation cycle left salt. Over generations, the canals clogged, the fields hardened, and the very water meant to sustain life poisoned the soil. By the time Babylonian scribes recorded the earth weeping white tears, it was too late. Their greatest achievement had sown the seeds of collapse. China's battle with the Yellow River reveals an even starker lesson in the limits of control. After the catastrophic flood of 1855, Qing dynasty engineers attempted something unprecedented, forcing the river back into its old course. Thousands of laborers toiled for years, building dikes higher than ever before. They succeeded temporarily, but at a horrific cost. The river, compressed between artificial walls, accumulated silt even faster. Within decades, it burst free again with renewed fury. Modern satellite images show why. The Yellow River's natural tendency is to wander. Fighting this instinct only delays the inevitable while magnifying the disaster. The Romans, masters of concrete and aqueducts, fared no better. When Tiber floods repeatedly submerged Rome, emperors responded with monumental engineering, straightening the river's bends, paving its banks, even tunneling diversion channels through hills. Yet the floods kept coming. Dig through Rome's silt layers today, and you'll find centuries of flood debris stacked like geological receipts for human arrogance. The harder they fought the Tiber, the more it reminded them who was really in charge. What unites these failures isn't poor planning, it's a fundamental misunderstanding of rivers as static systems. Ancient engineers saw waterways as puzzles to be solved, not partners to be negotiated with. Modern hydrology reveals the truth. Rivers are living systems, constantly adjusting to rainfall, erosion, and even the gravitational pull of the moon. The Mississippi, for example, wants to shift its delta westward every 1,000 years, a fact the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers spends billions annually to resist. Like the Qing dynasty's feudal dikes, today's levees may simply be storing up catastrophe for future generations. Yet there are glimmers of wisdom in the archaeological record. The Khmer Empire's vast reservoir network at Anchor didn't fight nature. It worked with monsoon cycles, storing wet season surplus for droughts. Oman's ancient afflage systems tapped groundwater without depleting it by following natural gradients. These successes shared a common philosophy: adaptation over domination. Perhaps the real lesson of history isn't that rivers are uncontrollable, but that the best engineering mimics nature's flexibility rather than defies it. As climate change intensifies floods and droughts worldwide, this ancient insight might be our most urgent survival tool. Ancient people didn't just rely on rivers, they revered them as living gods. The Ganges wasn't merely water to Hindus, she was goddess Ganga descending from heaven to purify the earth. Pharaohs made offerings to Hapi, the Nile's personification, whose belly swelled with the annual flood. Even the Tiber had its own temple in Rome, where priests interpreted the river's moods as divine messages. But these weren't just poetic traditions, they were survival strategies wrapped in myth. When you deify a force of nature, you pay attention to its whims. Consider the Indus Valley's lost Saraswati, celebrated in the Rigveda as Nadatama, the greatest of rivers. Its disappearance wasn't just an ecological event, it became a spiritual crisis memorialized in hymns pleading for the river's return. Similarly, the Mesopotamians didn't just fear the Euphrates floods, they saw them as the wrath of Enki, the water god. Their solution: build ziggurats as stairways to the heavens, hoping to negotiate with the deities controlling the waters. These myths served as early warning systems, encoding generations of observational wisdom. A flood might be punishment for human arrogance. A drought could signal divine displeasure. By making rivers sentient, cultures developed narratives that encouraged sustainable practices, taboos against polluting sacred waters, rituals timed to flood cycles, even laws preventing overuse. The Thames provides a fascinating counterpoint. Before London was a global city, Celtic tribes called the river Thameses, meaning the Dark One. Its tidal surges, capable of drowning entire villages, were attributed to river spirits demanding tribute. Medieval Londoners continued the tradition, tossing coins into the water as offerings, a practice that evolved into the modern wishing custom. What began as fear transformed into ritual, then folklore, and finally nostalgia. Yet the underlying truth remains: rivers commanded respect because their power was and is genuinely fearsome. Modern science might dismiss these beliefs as superstition, but they reveal something profound. Ancient cultures understood something we've forgotten. Rivers aren't resources to exploit, but partners in survival. The Maori of New Zealand legally recognized the Wanganui River as an ancestor with its own rights, a concept that would make perfect sense to the Harapans or Egyptians. Perhaps these myths weren't just explanations for the unknown, they were blueprints for coexistence, reminding us that when you strip rivers of their divinity, you risk stripping away our responsibility to protect them. After all, it's harder to dump toxins into something you believe has a soul. Archaeologists don't need time machines to trace vanished rivers. They read the landscape like a detective flipping through history's pages. Take the ruins of Petra, that rose-red city carved into Jordan's cliffs. Its towering facades and intricate water channels scream sophistication, but the real story lies in what's missing. Beneath the tourist paths, sediment cores reveal layers of coarse gravel, the telltale signature of a once powerful river. Then, abruptly, the gravel gives way to fine silt, like a faucet being turned off. This wasn't just a drought. The Wadi Musa, Petra's lifeline, had literally walked away, shifting its course downstream after an earthquake or flash flood. The Nabateans had engineered cisterns and dams to withstand years of drought, but no civilization can outlast a river that abandons its bed. Satellite imagery now lets us see these ancient betrayals from space. In Mesopotamia, infrared scans expose ghostly oxbow lakes' curved scars where the Euphrates once meandered before humans forced it straight. Along the Indus, ground-penetrating radar uncovers buried levees, evidence of desperate attempts to corral a river that refused to stay put. Sometimes the clues are heartbreakingly simple. The ruins of ports like Lothal in India, now miles inland, their docks leading not to water but to cracked earth. These silent witnesses tell us rivers don't just shift, they rewrite human geography with every bend. But the most chilling evidence comes from pollen. In Turkey, scientists drilling into Lake Nar found a sudden spike in pine pollen around 1200 BC, right when Hittite tablets describe famine. The explanation: as the nearby rivers dried, evergreen forests invaded former floodplains. Similarly, sediment cores from Cambodia's Tonle Sap show layers of Angkor's signature jasmine rice abruptly replaced by scrubland species. These botanical fingerprints prove environmental collapse wasn't theoretical, it was measured in starving stomachs and abandoned temples. Petra's ultimate irony. The Nabateans' own brilliance may have hastened their downfall. Their intricate water catchment systems concentrated erosion upstream, potentially speeding the Wadi Musa's desertion. It's a pattern we see again and again. The very innovations meant to tame nature end up provoking its wrath. Today, as satellites map ancient riverbeds beneath Dubai's skyscrapers or Phoenix's suburbs, we're left to wonder, will future archaeologists sift through our concrete layers and whisper, they should have known? The Amazon rainforest has long been painted as the ultimate untouched wilderness, a place where nature ruled unchallenged until modern explorers arrived. But laser technology is now peeling back the green curtain to reveal a startling truth. This pristine jungle was once a sprawling network of cities, farms, and roads, all connected by a watery web of rivers that no longer exist. In western Brazil's Acre state, LiDAR scans cut through the canopy to expose geometric earthworks spanning over 150 miles, ditch systems, plazas, and even pyramids dating back over 1,000 years. These weren't isolated villages, they were complex urban centers supporting tens of thousands. So what happened to these lost civilizations? The answer may lie in the rivers that vanished beneath their feet. Unlike the predictable Nile or the erratic Yellow River, the Amazon's waterways operate on a different scale entirely. Here, rivers don't just shift course, they rewrite the entire landscape in cycles of destruction and renewal. Satellite images reveal ancient oxbow lakes and paleochannels crisscrossing the basin like scars, evidence of rivers that jumped banks, merged, or simply dried up. Archaeologists studying the Bolivian Amazon's forest islands found something remarkable. These patches of high ground, once thought to be natural features, are actually artificial mounds built by pre-Columbian societies to escape flooding. The kicker, many now sit miles from any major waterway, suggesting the rivers that necessitated their construction have since migrated or disappeared. The scale of this hydrological betrayal is staggering. At the Kuhukugu site, linked to the legendary city of Z, researchers identified a causeway system connecting settlements across what's now impassable swamp. LiDAR shows these roads align perfectly with long-vanished tributaries of the Xingu River waterways that may have dried up due to natural climate shifts or even human-induced deforestation. It's an eerie parallel to modern concerns. Just as today's Amazon faces tipping points from logging and warming, ancient societies may have inadvertently altered rainfall patterns by clearing land for agriculture. The difference: when their rivers vanished, there was no backup plan. What makes these discoveries revolutionary isn't just the evidence of advanced societies, but what they reveal about resilience. Unlike Mesopotamia or the Indus Valley, where collapse often meant abandonment, Amazonian cultures adapted with astonishing creativity. At the Santarém site, pottery fragments tell of a people who transitioned from river-dependent fishing to upland farming as waters receded. The terra preta soils human-made black earth still fertile centuries later prove they engineered solutions to ecological crises. Yet even innovation has limits. When the rivers that served as highways for trade and communication dissolved into isolated channels, cultural memory frayed. Languages, technologies, and stories vanished into the green silence. The jungle's greatest irony: it both preserves and erases. The same humidity that rots wooden artifacts also guards earthworks from erosion, while the lack of stone construction led early archaeologists to underestimate these societies entirely. Now, as LiDAR exposes grid-patterned settlements beneath foliage, we're forced to confront a humbling reality. The Amazon wasn't a wilderness waiting to be tamed, but a graveyard of civilizations that mastered their environment until their environment changed the rules. As climate change threatens modern river systems worldwide, these buried cities offer more than historical intrigue. They're a test case in how societies thrive or fail when the waters beneath them refuse to stay still. The Oxus River didn't just flow, it dictated empires. Known today as the Amu Darya, this Central Asian titan was once the pulsing heart of the Silk Road, a liquid highway connecting the Mediterranean to China. Caravans laden with spices, silk, and gold depended on its waters to navigate the brutal deserts of Bactria and Sogdia. Cities like Termez and Balkh grew fat on the trade, their bazaars buzzing with languages from Persia to the Punjab. Then, around the 13th century, the Oxus staged a quiet rebellion. Silt buildup from centuries of irrigation, combined with shifting tectonic plates, sent the river veering northwest away from its historic path toward the Aral Sea and straight into the Caspian. The change might seem minor on a map, but for the merchants and kings who relied on its constancy, it was an economic earthquake. Overnight, entire cities became backwaters. Termez, once a thriving crossroads, found itself stranded miles from the new channel. The fortress city of Gurganj, capital of Khwarezm, watched helplessly as the river that fed its moats and fields retreated. Without water, the region's agricultural surplus, the fuel for Silk Road trade, dried up. Caravans rerouted, bypassing the now parched cities in favor of routes along the Sirdarya or through the Hindu Kush. The Mongol warlords who swept through shortly after didn't just exploit this weakness, they were arguably pushed toward it. When Genghis Khan's armies sacked Gurganj in 1221, they weren't just destroying a city, they were capitalizing on a power vacuum left by a river's betrayal. But the Oxus wasn't unique in its disruptive power. Half a world away, the Mississippi's meanders reshaped North America's trade networks long before European settlers arrived. Cahokia, the great mound-building city near modern St. Louis, thrived for centuries as a hub where the Mississippi, Missouri, and Illinois rivers converged. Then, around 1400 AD, the rivers shifted. Floods became erratic, channels silted up, and the trade in copper, shells, and salt that sustained Cahokia's 20,000 residents faltered. By the time Spanish explorers arrived, the city was abandoned, its pyramids reclaimed by prairie grass. Like the Silk Road's merchants, Cahokia's people learned too late that rivers don't care about human plans. The real lesson of these trade route revolutions isn't just about geography, it's about fragility. Civilizations build their wealth on predictability, assuming rivers will remain loyal partners. But water follows gravity, not treaties. When the Rhone shifted westward in the Middle Ages, it left the once prosperous Roman port of Arelate modern Arles stranded inland. Venice's dominance of Mediterranean trade owed as much to the Po River's stable delta as to its naval prowess. Even today, China's Belt and Road Initiative hinges on stable waterways from the Mekong to the Volga. History whispers a warning: the same rivers that lift empires can drown them, not with floods but with silence, because when a highway decides to move, the world has no choice but to follow. The Mississippi River isn't just drifting, it's plotting a quiet revolution. Right now, beneath the barges and bridges of America's mightiest waterway, an invisible battle is raging. The river's natural tendency is to abandon its current path and carve a new course to the Gulf of Mexico, seeking a steeper, shorter route down the Atchafalaya Basin. This isn't speculation, it's simple physics. The Mississippi's current channel loops in a long, inefficient crescent, while the Atchafalaya offers a straight shot to the sea. Every flood season, the river strains against the Army Corps of Engineers' monumental controls, the old river control structure, like a prisoner testing the bars of its cell. The stakes couldn't be higher. If the Mississippi succeeds, cities like Baton Rouge and New Orleans would become backwaters overnight. The river's current channel delivers 60% of America's agricultural exports and supplies drinking water to millions. Without it, the port of South Louisiana, the nation's busiest, would wither, stranding billions in trade. The ecological fallout would be equally catastrophic. The Atchafalaya's smaller basin couldn't handle the Mississippi's full force without massive flooding, while the abandoned delta near New Orleans would starve of sediment, accelerating land loss, already swallowing a football field of wetlands every hour. History offers grim precedents. In the 1800s, the Mississippi abruptly shifted course near Vicksburg, leaving the town's bustling docks high and dry. More recently, a 1973 flood nearly overwhelmed the old river controls, coming within hours of triggering a permanent diversion. Engineers describe maintaining the current channel as holding back the ocean with a broom, a temporary fix against nature's relentless will. Yet the real danger isn't just the river's power, it's our illusion of control. Like the Qing dynasty clinging to the Yellow River's southern course or the Soviets draining the Aral Sea, we've bet everything on forcing nature to obey human plans. Climate change ups the ante. Rising seas and stronger storms make the Mississippi's delta even more unstable. The Army Corps' own models predict a 1 in 3 chance of catastrophic failure at Old River by 2050. There's a bitter irony here. The very levees and spillways meant to protect New Orleans have worsened the threat by preventing the natural land-building floods that once replenished the delta. Meanwhile, industries along the river resist changes that might disrupt their profits, echoing the short-term thinking that doomed ancient Mesopotamia. The difference, this time, the crisis won't unfold over centuries. Satellites already show the Atchafalaya's pull strengthening yearly. Some communities are preparing. Louisiana's coastal master plan includes ambitious projects to divert sediment before it's lost to the Gulf, mimicking nature's old rhythms. Scientists study the Dutch Room for the River program, which trades rigid control for strategic floodplains. But these solutions require something history shows we struggle with: humility. The Mississippi doesn't need us, we need it. And unless we learn from the ruins of Petra, the salt-encrusted fields of Sumer, and the dried-up ports of the Oxus, we risk becoming the next civilization left stranded by a river that refused to stay put. Venice isn't drowning, it's being pushed under. The city's famous canals, once its lifeline, now betray it with every high tide. Unlike ancient cities abandoned by rivers that wandered away, Venice's crisis isn't natural. It's the result of a double assault, centuries of sucking groundwater from beneath its foundations and rising seas lapping at its doorsteps. The numbers don't lie. Since the 1920s, Venice has sunk over 9 inches, while global sea levels have climbed nearly 8 inches. Combine those forces, and you get a qua'all to the notorious floods that now submerge St. Mark's Square dozens of times a year. But here's the cruel twist: Venice didn't just harm itself. The very industries that made it rich, glassmaking, shipbuilding, tourism, demanded so much water that between 1930 and 1970, wells drained the aquifer beneath the city like a punctured canteen. By the time scientists realized the damage, the ground had compacted irreversibly. Yet Venice's story isn't just about loss, it's about resistance. The MOSE project, a system of 78 massive floodgates installed at the lagoon's inlets, represents one of history's most ambitious attempts to defy nature's will. When tides surge, these steel barriers rise to seal the city off from the Adriatic, a feat of engineering that would make Roman hydrologists weep. But even this billion-dollar fix has limits. Rising seas could render MOSE obsolete by 2100, forcing gates to stay closed for months at a time, trapping sewage in the canals and choking marine life. Meanwhile, the weight of tourism, 30 million visitors annually, presses down on already sinking palazzos. It's a vicious cycle. The city must attract crowds to fund its survival, but those very crowds accelerate its decline. The parallels to ancient river cities are haunting. Like the Khmer Empire's reservoirs at Ankara or the Mesopotamians over irrigated fields, Venice's solutions created new vulnerabilities. But there's a key difference. We're watching it unfold in real time. Satellite measurements show the city still sinks 1 to 2 millimeters yearly, while subsidence from cruise ship traffic vibrates fragile foundations. Yet amid the gloom, glimmers of adaptation emerge. Architects now retrofit historic buildings with waterproof basements, while algae-resistant bricks reduce canal maintenance. The Serenissima's survival may hinge on something subtler than steel barriers, a shift from fighting water to living with it, just as the city's founders did when they built on wooden pilings driven into salt marsh. Venice forces us to ask an uncomfortable question: when does saving a city mean freezing it in time? The Dutch, facing similar threats, chose to redesign their relationship with water, creating floating neighborhoods and parks designed to flood. Venice clings to its stone past, but the tides care little for nostalgia. As the Adriatic inches higher, the city becomes a test case for every coastal metropolis, from Mumbai to Miami. Because while rivers may abandon cities slowly, the sea claims them with the relentless patience of a rising storm. The lesson isn't just about engineering, it's about humility. Venice's survival may depend less on holding back the water than on learning, at last, to let it in. Ankara was a city built on water. The Khmer Empire's crown jewel boasted the most sophisticated hydraulic system of the medieval world, an intricate web of canals, reservoirs, and moats stretching over 300 square miles. At its heart lay the West Barre, a man-made lake so vast it could hold 500 Olympic swimming pools. This wasn't just infrastructure. It was a liquid lifeline designed to capture every drop of monsoon rain, storing it for the dry months when the skies turned to brass. For 5 centuries, the system worked flawlessly, turning the Cambodian jungle into a rice bowl that fed over 1 million people. Then, around the 1400s, the monsoons began to fail. Not just once, but in punishing cycles that left the Barre cracked and empty. The same engineering that had sustained Anka's golden age now accelerated its downfall, because when your civilization is built around water, even the mightiest reservoirs can't save you from a sky that refuses to cooperate. The irony cuts deep. Anka's engineers had accounted for floods by building spillways to redirect excess water. They'd planned for droughts with interconnected tanks to share scarce resources. What they couldn't foresee was climate change, not the man-made crisis we face today, but a natural shift in monsoon patterns linked to the Little Ice Age. Tree rings from Vietnamese oaks tell the story. Decades of weaker rains, followed by catastrophic deluges that washed away the very topsoil their canals depended on. Without steady monsoons to replenish the system, Anka's reservoirs became stagnant breeding grounds for malaria. The canals, once highways for trade and transport, turned into disease-ridden ditches. And the rice paddies, they withered into dust, taking the empire's food security with them. This isn't just ancient history, it's a blueprint for modern fragility. Today's megacities mirror Anka's reliance on predictable water cycles. Take Los Angeles, which pipes in 85% of its water from distant rivers and aquifers. Or Delhi, where 20 million people depend on monsoon-fed reservoirs now shrinking due to deforestation. Like the Khmer, we've built staggering feats of engineering, the Colorado River's dams, China's South-North Water Transfer Project. But these systems share Anka's fatal flaw. They assume the climate that designed them will stay fixed. The Khmer did something remarkable, though. As Anka's core collapsed, its people didn't vanish, they adapted. Archaeologists find evidence of decentralized water systems springing up in the countryside, smaller and more flexible than the Grand Barrays. Farmers shifted from water-intensive rice to drought-resistant crops like cassava. The empire faded, but its people survived by letting go of the old ways. That's the uncomfortable lesson for our age. Resilience might not mean building bigger reservoirs, but learning to live with less. As satellite images reveal Anka's ghostly canals beneath the jungle, they whisper a warning. The greatest civilizations aren't undone by lack of ingenuity, but by the refusal to change course when the waters do. The Rhine and Danube weren't just rivers, they were liquid battle lines. For centuries, these winding waterways decided the fates of empires, serving as natural barriers that kings and generals fought to control. When Charlemagne carved Europe into kingdoms, he used the Rhine as his knife. Rome's legions marched along the Danube, building forts like Carnuntum to guard against Germanic tribes. But rivers don't recognize treaties. When the Danube shifted its course after a massive flood in 1342, it didn't just redraw maps, it handed the Ottoman Empire a strategic gift, exposing Hungary's weakened southern flank and paving the way for their conquest of the Balkans. Water scarcity has always been a silent provocateur of war. Take the ancient city of Umma and its rival Lagash in Mesopotamia, locked in history's first recorded water conflict 4,500 years ago. Cuneiform tablets detail how Umma's king, desperate after the Euphrates dwindled, smashed Lagash's irrigation canals to steal their water. The resulting battles dragged on for generations, proving that when rivers fade, diplomacy often follows. Fast forward to modern times and the pattern holds. In 1967, control of the Jordan River's headwaters was a hidden factor in the Six-Day War. Syria's attempts to divert the river's tributaries away from Israel were seen as an existential threat, triggering preemptive strikes. Today, the stakes are even higher. The Nile's Grand Renaissance Dam has Egypt and Ethiopia in a diplomatic standoff, with Cairo warning it could defend its water rights by any means necessary. In Central Asia, Tajikistan's plans to dam the Amu Darya could strangle Uzbekistan's cotton fields. reviving tensions in a region already scarred by Soviet-era water disputes. Even the Colorado River, shared by 7 U.S. states and Mexico, has sparked legal battles so intense they're nicknamed water wars, the common thread. Rivers don't just quench thirst, they fuel power. What's chilling is how little we've learned from history. Ancient conflicts over the Tigris or Indus played out with swords and spears. Today's water wars would involve drones and dams. Climate change adds gasoline to the fire. By 2050, the UN predicts 5 billion people could face water shortages. The Indus Water Treaty between India and Pakistan, already strained by glacier melt, may not survive another decade of drought. Meanwhile, China's control over the Mekong's headwaters gives it a hydraulic veto over Southeast Asia's food supply, a modern replay of Rome's domination of the Danube. Yet there's a glimmer of hope in the chaos. The 1960 Indus Treaty, for all its flaws, has outlasted 3 wars between India and Pakistan. The Senegal River Basin Agreement turned potential conflict into cooperation among Mauritania, Mali, and Senegal. These cases prove rivers can be bridges as easily as barriers, if we choose to see them that way, because while borders may be drawn in ink, they're always written first in water. And as the climate shifts, the world's thirsty empires will have to decide whether to fight over the last drops or finally learn to share. Beneath the Sahara's endless dunes lie secrets written in water. Satellite images reveal the ghostly traces of rivers that once turned this desert into a thriving network of lakes and grasslands, a lost world where hippos wallowed and ancient civilizations flourished. The Garamantes, a sophisticated culture that ruled parts of modern Libya 2,000 years ago, didn't just survive here, they thrived, building underground tunnels called fagaras to tap into fossil water reserves. Their capital, Garama, was an oasis of palm groves and vineyards, sustained by rivers that have long since vanished into the sand. But what if these watery highways aren't gone forever? Climate scientists now suggest the Sahara's past might hold clues to its future, and the signs are both thrilling and unsettling. The story of the Garamantes reads like a cautionary tale written in dust. At their peak, they controlled trans-Saharan trade routes, exchanging gold and ivory with Rome and Carthage. Their secret, a labyrinth of underground channels that funneled water from ancient aquifers to their fields, turning the desert green. But even the deepest wells run dry. As rainfall patterns shifted and the rivers above ground disappeared, the Garamantes pumped their hidden reserves faster than nature could replenish them. By the 5th century, their tunnels lay empty, their cities abandoned to the advancing dunes. Sound familiar? Today's megacities from Phoenix to Riyadh are repeating the same gamble, draining aquifers that took millennia to fill. Here's where the plot twists. The Sahara wasn't always a desert, and it might not stay one. Paleoclimatologists studying sediment cores have uncovered a startling cycle. Every 20,000 years or so, the region swings between lush greenery and arid wasteland, driven by subtle shifts in Earth's orbit. The last green Sahara phase peaked around 6,000 years ago, when monsoon rains filled vast lakes like the Megachad, which was larger than the Caspian Sea. Rock art from Tassili Enaja shows giraffes and crocodiles roaming landscapes that are now barren. But the real bombshell, some models predict climate change could trigger a partial return of these rains by the end of this century. Imagine the implications. The same forces drying up the Mediterranean could redirect moisture toward the Sahara, resurrecting long-dormant river systems. Already, erratic rainfall has caused temporary lakes to form in Mauritania's desert, while vegetation has crept northward in Sudan. For countries like Niger and Chad, where drought has fueled conflict over shrinking resources, This could be transformative or disastrous. A greener Sahara might ease food shortages, but it could also disrupt global weather patterns, turning Europe colder as warm Atlantic currents shift. And let's not forget the buried cities. If the sands retreat, will we find the ruins of lost civilizations emerging like echoes from a forgotten age? The Garamontes legacy teaches us that water is never just water. It's a currency of power, a sculptor of empires. Their fagaras were engineering marvels, but they couldn't outlast a changing climate. Today, as satellite maps reveal ancient riverbeds beneath the desert, we're left with a haunting question. Will we repeat their mistakes, or will we learn to read the whispers of the wind and sand? Because the Sahara remembers, its buried rivers are a message, not just about the past, but about the fluid, unpredictable future we're all navigating. And if history is any guide, the next chapter will be written not in stone, but in the ever-shifting language of water. California's water crisis isn't looming, it's already here. The Colorado River, once a roaring force carving through the Grand Canyon, now trickles to a stop miles short of the sea, its water siphoned off by farms and cities along its path. Aquifers beneath the Central Valley, drained to irrigate almond orchards and vineyards, are collapsing like deflated balloons, sinking the land itself in some places by as much as a foot per year. This isn't just drought, it's the unraveling of a system built on the assumption that water would always be abundant. The parallels to the Harapan Civilization are impossible to ignore. Just as the Saraswati River's disappearance 4,000 years ago forced an exodus, could the American Southwest face its own great migration when the wells run dry? The numbers tell a grim story. Lake Mead and Lake Powell, the Colorado River's two largest reservoirs, hover near dead pool levels, the point where water can no longer flow downstream. The river's annual flow has dropped nearly 20% since the year 2000, while demand has surged. Farmers in Arizona's Pinal County, once promised limitless water, now watch fields turn to dust as allocations vanish. Phoenix, Las Vegas, and Los Angeles have spent billions on conservation, but even low-flow showers and artificial turf can't offset the deficit, the harsh truth. The Southwest's water rights were negotiated in the 1920s after an unusually wet period that skewed expectations. Like the Khmer Empire betting on eternal monsoons, modern cities built their futures on a statistical fluke. What makes this crisis different from ancient collapses is scale and speed. The Harapans had centuries to adapt as the Saraswati faded. California's reckoning could unfold in decades. Satellite data reveals the Central Valley's aquifers are being drained 8 times faster than nature can replenish them. Entire communities like Porterville have seen wells run dry, forcing residents to rely on bottled water trucked in by the state. Meanwhile, the Salton Sea, once a thriving resort area fed by agricultural runoff, is evaporating into a toxic dust bowl, its exposed lakebed laced with pesticides that windstorms carry into nearby lungs. The warning signs are everywhere, yet almond farms, a single tree drinks over a gallon of water per day, still expand into sun-baked scrubland. But there's a twist in this tale. Unlike the Garamontes or the Maya, modern societies have something their ancestors lacked: foresight. Israel's drip irrigation technology, pioneered in its own deserts, could slash agricultural water use overnight. Solar-powered desalination plants, though expensive, offer a lifeline for coastal cities. Even simple fixes, like covering California's canals with solar panels to reduce evaporation, could save billions of gallons. The real question isn't whether solutions exist, it's whether they'll arrive fast enough. Legal battles over water rights drag on for years, while infrastructure projects face funding delays and NIMBY protests. Ancient civilizations collapsed because they had no alternatives. We're choosing ours in slow motion. The most haunting lesson from history isn't about scarcity, it's about rigidity. The Khmer Empire's reservoirs couldn't adapt to erratic monsoons, just as today's water laws can't handle shrinking snowpacks, but humans are capable of astonishing reinvention. The ancestral Pueblones, faced with drought in Choco Canyon, didn't vanish. They migrated to the Rio Grande, reinventing their culture along the way. Will Californians cling to lawns and water-intensive crops until the taps shut off, or will they rewrite their relationship with water in time? The answer will determine whether the Southwest becomes another cautionary tale or a story of resilience. Because rivers and aquifers don't negotiate, they simply flow, or don't, regardless of human ambition. And when they stop, civilizations don't get a vote. Bangladesh's landscape is a living, breathing contradiction, both a gift and a curse carved by water. The Ganges-Brahmaputra Delta, the largest on Earth, isn't just shaped by rivers, it's locked in a perpetual tug of war with them. Every year, monsoon rains swell these waterways, depositing fresh silt to nourish the soil while simultaneously erasing islands and villages from the map. Over 200 rivers crisscross this low-lying nation, but their paths are anything but fixed. Channels that once ferried cargo shift overnight, leaving ports stranded. Farmland rich with harvests one season may vanish beneath floodwaters the next. For the 12 million people living in the Delta's ever-changing embrace, home isn't a permanent address, it's a fleeting negotiation with the currents. What makes Bangladesh's plight unique isn't just the scale of displacement, but the speed. Unlike ancient civilizations that collapsed over centuries, entire communities here face existential threats within a single lifetime. Take the island of Bola, once a thriving agricultural hub. Between 1963 and 2008, the Meghna River swallowed over half its landmass, displacing 500,000 people. Survivors didn't just lose homes, they watched graveyards, generations of ancestors, slip beneath the waves. Yet even as the water claims ground, it also creates. New islands called chars emerge from the silt, drawing desperate settlers to their unstable shores. These ephemeral lands offer a cruel bargain: fertile soil for crops, but no guarantee the river won't reclaim them by next monsoon. Modern engineering has tried to tame this chaos with mixed results. The World Bank-funded coastal embankment project of the 1960s built thousands of miles of levees, aiming to shield farmland from saltwater intrusion. At first it worked, rice yields soared, then the unintended consequences hit. The embankments prevented silt from replenishing the land, causing protected areas to sink relative to rising sea levels. Meanwhile, trapped freshwater became stagnant, breeding waterborne diseases. It was a bitter lesson. In the Delta, rigid solutions often backfire. Today, engineers are trying a softer approach. Tidal river management deliberately breaches levees during dry seasons, allowing sediment-laden water to nourish sinking fields. Farmers, once resistant, now see the wisdom in working with the river's rhythm rather than against it. The true innovation, though, lies in adaptation. Floating schools bob along floodwaters, ensuring education continues when roads disappear. Farmers cultivate hydroponic vegetables on rafts during wet seasons. In the sprawling slums of Dhaka, where climate migrants flock, NGOs teach tailoring and solar panel repair, skills portable enough to survive the next displacement. These aren't just survival tactics, they're blueprints for a future where mobility is the norm. The Dutch, masters of water management, have taken note, collaborating on amphibious housing prototypes that rise with floodwaters. Yet for all the ingenuity, the Delta's people pay a steep psychological toll. Unlike sudden disasters like earthquakes, river erosion is a slow-motion crisis, grinding away at stability day by day. Psychologists document solastalgia, a form of homesickness felt while still at home, as familiar landscapes transform beyond recognition. Folk songs mourn lost villages, while children draw pictures of houses on stilts, as if anticipating the next flood. This emotional weight underscores a harsh truth. Climate change isn't just altering environments, it's rewriting cultures. The Ganges-Brahmaputra system holds a mirror to our planet's future. As glaciers melt and seas rise, other deltas from the Mekong to the Mississippi will face similar upheavals. Bangladesh's experiment in resilience offers both warning and wisdom. Because when the land itself is fluid, survival depends not on resisting change, but learning to flow with it. The delta's lesson is clear. The age of fixed borders and permanent settlements may be ending, replaced by an era where human resilience must match the restless energy of the rivers themselves. The Rhine didn't just change its course in 1374, it rewrote the emotional map of Europe. Towns like Kaiserswerth, once bustling river ports, found themselves stranded inland overnight, their docks leading to fields instead of water. For centuries, these communities had defined themselves by the river's rhythm. Fishermen timed their days by its currents, merchants built fortunes on its trade routes, and festivals celebrated its seasonal floods. When the Rhine abandoned them, it wasn't just an economic disaster, it was an existential crisis. Chroniclers of the time wrote of a grief as deep as the riverbed, a collective mourning for the liquid heart that had shaped their identity. This phenomenon isn't confined to medieval Europe. Along the Mississippi, towns like Napoleon, Arkansas, once a thriving steamboat hub, withered when the river shifted its course in the 1800s, leaving behind a ghost of brick warehouses and empty wharves. In Bangladesh today, entire villages hold funeral ceremonies for patches of land swallowed by the shifting Brahmaputra, complete with floral offerings and prayers for the lost earth. Psychologists call this solastalgia, a specific form of homesickness felt when your home is still physically present, but its essence has been stolen. Rivers aren't just water, they're living narratives. When they vanish or revolt, they take with them the stories, traditions, and collective memory etched into their banks. Yet some communities refuse to let go. In Utrecht, Netherlands, when the Rhine's old course dried up in the Middle Ages, locals didn't abandon the empty channel. They transformed it into a sunken garden, a deliberate act of reimagining loss as beauty. Modern Rotterdam takes this further, designing floating neighborhoods that rise and fall with the river's whims, embracing fluidity as part of their identity. Along the Colorado River, the Cocopah tribe, whose name literally means people of the river, has spent decades reviving delta wetlands, not just for ecology but to heal cultural wounds. Their traditional songs, once tied to the river's flow, are now relearned from recordings made by anthropologists in the 1930s. The deeper question isn't whether communities can survive such blows, but how they redefine survival. In China's Hubei province, the construction of the Three Gorges Dam displaced over 1 million people, submerging ancestral villages beneath artificial lakes. While some resettled in sterile high-rises, others secretly row back to the reservoir, lowering weighted nets to touch the rooftops of their drowned homes. This haunting ritual reveals a truth. Rivers don't just shape geography, they anchor memory. When the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers straightened the Kissimmee River in the 1960s, draining its wetlands, locals reported nightmares of missing water, a subconscious rebellion against the unnatural straightness. Today's climate refugees face these ruptures at an unprecedented scale. The Salton Sea's retreat in California isn't just an environmental crisis, It's erasing a working-class culture built around fishing and bird-watching, leaving behind toxic dust and fractured pride. In the Mekong Delta, where saltwater intrusion forces farmers to abandon rice paddies, depression rates soar among elders who can't reconcile their lifelong skills with the new reality. Yet resilience flickers in unexpected ways. Vietnamese communities now cultivate saline-resistant shrimp, blending old traditions with brutal pragmatism. In Louisiana's disappearing bayous, young people document their grandparents' stories, turning oral history into a form of resistance against cultural amnesia. Perhaps the most profound lesson comes from the Inuit of Alaska, where melting permafrost is altering ancient river routes. Instead of resisting, they've updated their intricate mental maps not as surrender, but as an act of continuity. Their word sila means both weather and consciousness, a reminder that humans and rivers think alike, flowing, adapting, sometimes flooding, but always moving forward. The scars of lost rivers never fully heal, but they can become compasses, pointing not just to what was taken, but to what might still be rebuilt. Rivers don't always disappear forever. Sometimes they stage comebacks that defy expectations. Take Oklahoma's Cimarron River, a once-vanished waterway that suddenly reappeared in the 1990s after decades of dryness. For years, its bed lay barren, a dusty scar on the prairie where only old-timers remembered flowing water. Then, after a series of unusually wet seasons, the river roared back to life, carving fresh channels through farmland and surprising everyone who thought it was gone for good. The Cimarron's resurrection wasn't just a fluke, it was a reminder that rivers have long memories, and given the right conditions, they can reclaim their ancient paths with startling speed. Could the same happen for legendary lost rivers like the Saraswati? Geologists studying India's Thar Desert have uncovered tantalizing clues. Satellite imagery reveals underground reservoirs along the Saraswati's ghostly course, remnants of the Himalayan glaciers that once fed it. In some places, farmers tapping these aquifers report wells filling unexpectedly, as if the earth itself is straining to revive its old waterways. The government's Saraswati River Revival Project aims to harness these hidden reserves, reconnecting fragmented channels to breathe life back into the mythic river. Skeptics argue it's a political pipe dream, but history offers precedent. In Spain's Tabernas Desert, a long dry river suddenly flowed again after heavy rains in 1996, proving even the most barren landscapes can remember how to carry water. Yet reviving lost rivers isn't as simple as waiting for rain. When Argentina's Rio Atoll returned after a 70-year absence, it brought chaos rather than renewal. The water inundated towns built on its dry bed, destroyed roads, and triggered legal battles over diverted resources. Similarly, California's Tulare Lake, a vast body of water drained for agriculture in the 20th century, has begun reappearing during wet years, swallowing crops and highways alike. These resurgences expose a painful truth: landscapes adapt to absence. What seems like a homecoming for the river can feel like an invasion for those who have moved into its empty space. The science behind these comebacks is as fascinating as the cultural upheaval they cause. Hydrologists describe rivers as threshold systems, entities that can flip between states based on subtle triggers. A slight increase in rainfall, a shift in groundwater pumping, or even the collapse of an old dam can awaken dormant channels. In Australia's Channel Country, rivers like the Diamantina vanish for years, only to flood explosively when distant monsoons send pulses of water across the outback. These boom-bust cycles hint at a deeper resilience in river systems, a capacity to wait out dry spells that might last centuries. For communities living along ghost rivers, the possibility of return stirs complex emotions. Along the Amu Darya's former delta near the Aral Sea, elders tell stories of fishing villages swallowed by sand. If the river ever reclaims its old path, would it restore what was lost or erase the adaptations that replaced it? The question isn't just scientific, it's existential. Rivers shape identities as much as landscapes. When the Tertre River in France's Pyrenees unexpectedly returned in 2019, locals didn't just celebrate, they debated whether it was the same river their ancestors knew or an imposter wearing its name. Perhaps the most profound lesson lies in the interplay between human intervention and natural forces. While projects like India's Saraswati revival attempt to engineer a homecoming, other rivers need only time and space to heal themselves. New Zealand's Aotearoa River, strangled by irrigation for 80 years, began healing when earthquakes in 2016 rerouted its waters back to its original course. No human planner could have designed such a perfect restoration. The river, it seemed, remembered where it belonged. Whether through climate shifts, tectonic quirks, or sheer persistence, rivers have a way of defying obituaries. The Saraswati may never flow as it did in Vedic hymns, but its story, like the Cimarrons, proves that in the realm of rivers, gone is often just another word for waiting. The real question isn't whether lost rivers can return, but whether we're prepared to share the land when they do. After all, rivers don't ask permission, they rewrite the map on their own terms. The Dutch have been fighting water for centuries, but their approach has fundamentally changed from brute force resistance to strategic collaboration. After devastating floods in 1953 killed nearly 2,000 people, the Netherlands launched the Delta Works, a colossal system of dams and storm barriers designed to withstand 10,000-year storms. But by the 21st century, engineers faced an uncomfortable truth. Even the mightiest barriers can't outmuscle climate change, so they pivoted to room for the river, a radical philosophy that dismantles dikes in some areas to create controlled floodplains, allowing the Rhine and Meuse to expand safely during surges. Cities like Nijmegen transformed former battlegrounds into waterfront parks that double as emergency spillways. It's a masterclass in humility, recognizing that rivers will always win a war of containment, so the smarter play is to guide their energy rather than suppress it. Singapore takes a different but equally innovative path. With no natural aquifers and limited rainfall, the island nation turned scarcity into strength by building a closed-loop water system so advanced it's dubbed NE water. Every drop of wastewater, from kitchen sinks to factory runoff, gets purified through microfiltration, reverse osmosis, and UV disinfection until it's cleaner than most bottled water. The result, a supply so reliable that Singapore exports water tech to water-stressed regions worldwide. Their secret isn't just technology, it's mindset. By pricing water as the precious resource it is and investing in public education, they've achieved something rare, a society that treats every drop as irreplaceable. These successes hint at a broader truth. The next great river crisis won't be solved by isolated projects, but through global cooperation. Consider the Mekong River Commission, where Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, and Vietnam share data on dam operations and sediment flows, a fragile pact constantly tested by China's upstream dams. Or the Senegal River Basin Organization, which manages water allocations across 4 nations using a mix of satellite monitoring and traditional conflict resolution methods. Even the Nile Basin Initiative, despite tensions over Ethiopia's dam, has kept dialogue alive through joint research on climate adaptation. The stakes couldn't be higher. By 2050, over 5 billion people could face water shortages, with transboundary rivers like the Colorado and Indus already stretched to breaking points. Ancient history offers a warning. When the Akkadians and Harappans failed to manage shared waters, collapse followed. But it also provides hope. The Khmer Empire's anchor thrived for centuries by balancing centralized reservoirs with local flexibility. Today's equivalent might be smart river compacts, combining AI-driven flow predictions with traditional knowledge, like the Aboriginal Australians' practice of reading river gums to predict droughts. Progress won't mean returning rivers to some mythical pristine state, but forging new relationships with their untamable nature. Rotterdam's floating neighborhoods and Bangladesh's amphibious schools prove humans can adapt to fluid landscapes without surrendering to chaos. The alternative, a world where, like the Garamontes of the Sahara or the mire of Tukol, we exhaust our lifelines fighting changes we helped create. The choice is ours. Will we be the civilization that mastered the art of flowing with the current, or another cautionary tale buried in river silt? In the delta villages of Bangladesh, a bull Mansur wakes before dawn to check the riverbank. His family has farmed this land for 5 generations, but the Jamuna River no longer respects those old boundaries. Each monsoon season, the water creeps closer to his tin-roofed home, swallowing another strip of fertile soil. Last year, it took our neighbor's mango grove overnight, he says, pointing to where children now swim in what was once an orchard. Yet a bull hasn't given up. He's experimenting with floating gardens, bamboo rafts topped with soil that rise with the floods. Nearby, women weave nets from water hyacinths, turning an invasive species into livelihood. Their ingenuity isn't taught in engineering schools. It's born from necessity, written in the calluses of hands that rebuild what the river takes away. Half a world away in Arizona's Pinal County, third-generation rancher Maribel Vasquez walks the cracked earth where the Gila River once flowed. Her grandfather's photographs show cattle drinking from wide channels. Today, she trucks in water at 4 times the price of 5 years ago. The river didn't leave us, we left it, she admits, recalling how cotton farms drained the aquifer beneath her feet. But Maribel's adapting, replacing thirsty alfalfa with drought-resistant tepary beans and using ancient Akimal Owadam dry farming techniques. At night, she attends water district meetings where farmers argue over shrinking allocations, their voices tense with the realization that the West's water laws, some dating to the 1800s, were written for a climate that no longer exists. These stories aren't just footnotes to hydrological studies, they're living textbooks of resilience. Along the vanishing shores of Lake Chad, fisherman Amaru Idi strings his nets between the skeletons of abandoned boats, following fish migrations that now span international borders. In China's Hubei province, Lai Wenqi tends a rooftop garden 30 stories above the Yangtze, her family's compensation for the farmland drowned by the Three Gorges Dam. Each adaptation carries echoes of ancient strategies: the floating villages of Cambodia's Tonle Sap, the cliffside reservoirs of Petra, proving that while rivers shape civilizations, it's people who decide whether to sink or swim. What unites these modern river dwellers isn't just struggle, but a stubborn redefinition of home. The Gwich'in elders along Alaska's Yukon River teach children to read ice patterns their ancestors never saw, while Dutch engineers consult with Bangladeshi farmers about amphibious architecture. In Brazil's Xingu Basin, indigenous communities merge solar-powered sensors with traditional flood warnings, creating hybrid knowledge systems as fluid as the rivers themselves. These aren't stopgap measures but cultural evolutions, proof that human creativity flows as unpredictably as the waterways we depend on. The most profound lesson comes from those who have already lost everything. After the Indus abandoned his village in Pakistan's Sindh province, Hakim Ali became an unlikely activist, documenting displaced families with a smartphone. At first, we prayed for the river to return, he says, screening his films in tent camps. Now we pray not to forget its name. His work captures a universal truth that rivers live not just in their channels, but in the stories of those who have loved and lost them. As the climate reshapes our world's waterways, these frontline voices remind us that adaptation isn't surrender. It's the art of finding new currents in the same old flow.